February 2024. The last member of the original Disco Elysium writing team is fired from the studio. They simply take away his laptop. Afraid of being left without a job in a foreign city, he tries to make a deal with another studio that wants to create its own game, a spiritual successor to Disco Elysium. But after some time, he decides to leave that project too, and found his own studio, Summer Eternal. A studio where, as he imagines, everything will be different, everything will be right, so that the fate of Disco Elysium won't be repeated. But soon he is taken to court. Luck is clearly not on his side. And in the very first hearing, the judge rules in favor of an interim injunction forbidding him to work for 6 months. The decision takes effect immediately. He is left without income and his last savings go to lawyers. He realizes he won't have enough money for the next rent or even to pay his phone bill. Together with his partner, they gather what little money they have, pack up their belongings and their 3 cats into a van and drive toward Europe. But around 3 in the morning, the van breaks down in the middle of a French highway. No one wants to deal with the broken van. With the help from family and friends, they manage to collect a couple thousand euros to tow it, and at least make their way to relatives. The situation is critical. There is no money and no clear future. In the previous episode, we tried to understand what happened to the studio Zaum after the release of Disco Elysium. In this episode, I want to tell the story from the perspective of one person who lived through it all, from the very beginning to the very end, the writer Argo Tulik. And trust me, we will hear many surprising stories and learn some facts that were not covered in the last episode. Hi there and welcome to the Released podcast. Today technology surrounds us everywhere and we can't even imagine our lives without it. But every technology started as a bold idea in someone's head. In this podcast, we talk about the technologies that have changed our lives and the people who invented them. My name is Rival. Hi. Before we begin, I have a couple of announcements. First, in preparing this episode, I used interviews from the YouTube channel People Make Games and the podcast Human Can Opener. I mentioned the first channel in the previous episode, but the podcast Human Can Opener I really want to recommend to all fans of Disco Elysium. It has many fascinating interviews, and it lets you explore the world of Elysium in a fresh way. Second, everything told in this episode comes from the words of Argo and Dora. I relied on their interviews and their stories published on their personal Medium pages. I don't have the means to verify the accuracy of everything they've said, so I disclaim any responsibility. By continuing to listen, you should understand that some things, or maybe even everything, might turn out to be untrue. Just a disclaimer. Third, this is the final episode of this season. After this, the podcast is going on a break while I prepare the new season. It won't be about video games, but the topic will also be very interesting. I've already started working on it. And finally, I have a small request. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends or on social media. Unfortunately, there is still no other way for a small podcast like mine to find new listeners. I believe there are many people out there who would love to hear these stories. And only with your help can I reach them. Thank you. Whew, I think that's everything. Now let's get back to the episode. Let's rewind a bit. A young Argo is living in Tallinn, just about to turn 16. He has only one close friend, a buddy from his karate classes. That friend knows a group of other interesting kids, and Argo decides to invite them all to his 16th birthday party. Among them is Robert, the main creator of the world of Elysium, the one we talked about in detail in the last episode. That is how Argo and Robert first met.
I invited because I liked the friends that my karate partner had. I invited them to my 16th birthday, which I only remember the first maybe half an hour, but they apparently had a lot of fun. And I think like a few days later, Robert came around to check his email to use my internet. That was the time when internet. It really was a very rare thing. Most people didn't have internet back home, and that's how it started, and that's how it evolved. Robert just came around. We drank coffee, smoked cigarettes. I started going to his place.
Later, this group of 9 kids, together with Argo, would take on the name the Overcoats. They became a small but noticeable phenomenon in Estonia. They were all about the same age, always hanging out together and playing Dungeons and Dragons. Around them were others who wished they could join, but being called the Overcoats was a privilege. So there were 9 of them. Here is a quick portrait. Only one in the group had both parents. The rest were raised by their mothers. Only one finished high school. While many other kids around them thought reading was boring and books were for fools, Argo and his friends had a completely different attitude. They respected knowledge. They loved reading and were proud of it. Tolkien, for example. They read him constantly and had endless conversations about his world. They also listened to musicians like Tonu Trubetsky and his punk band Venaskont. Today Argo says that this band, their music, their world building through albums, lyrics and designs had a huge influence on the Overcoats and later on Elysium itself. And if you are wondering how punk rock and anarchism fit together with a certain elitism and love for Tolkien, well, here is how Argo explains it himself.
Anyways, like this had this kind of little bit of anarchist aristocracy. There's this hybrid that you can have a dynamite in one hand, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a cravat around your neck and velvet overcoat. Like this was a big stylistic shaper. And also with the overcoats, I never want to miss a chance to add that in addition to the name Overcoats, we also had a slogan or a motto. Again, doesn't translate perfectly, but here it is. Today we drink tea, tomorrow we rule the world. There's this little bit of this self-irony and this ambition, of course, to rule the world. But there's also like this element of how do I put it? We of course we consumed alcohol a lot, but it's kind of like this. No, we drink tea because we are intellectuals.
Almost all of them had dropped out of high school, but they kept lying to their mothers, pretending they were still attending. Every morning at 8 a.m., they would leave the house saying they were going to class, but instead they would head to a friend's place and wait until his mom went to work. Then, pulling together whatever little money they had, they would buy one pack of cigarettes to share. The whole gang would squeeze into the kitchen, smoking until they could barely see each other through the haze. They drank coffee too. The coffee made it feel more intellectual. They listened to punk rock and argued about Tolkien. Sometimes it wasn't a friend's kitchen, but different cafeterias around Tallinn.
With this economic pressure, don't really have a lot of spending money. Came with this really annoying habit to various cafeteria managers in Tallinn, where you have 9 guys coming in, sitting down, they buy one puljong, because puljong was the cheapest thing you could get. I think it cost like 5 Estonian crowns. And then they sit down with this one puljong, all 9 of them smoke, just chain smoking and drink that puljong for 2-3 hours.
And of course, they had already started building their own world. A world that at the time was called Evermere, which would eventually grow into what we now know as Elysium. It all began with Dungeons and Dragons. First they played, but little by little they started adding, changing, transforming the world into something of their own. It was still a tabletop role-playing setting, but Argo and his friends rarely actually played. More often, they just talk about it, creating new details and characters.
It's one of those things that, to me, perfectly illustrates the notion that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Because this part, the talking about it, sort of mentally evolving it, advancing it, polishing it, this was so rewarding that I don't know, like in some ways, I think Robert had some subconscious blocks about actually playing it, because well, when you're trying to actually make something new, it is scary to try it. And honestly, being a game master, it's a scary thing. For the smallest ridiculous reasons, game sessions were cancelled. There were so many times when we were supposed to play, but something happened. Like, no, we don't have enough cigarettes. Like 1 pack of cigarettes for an entire evening. Come on, we're not playing. But we keep talking about it.
They would discuss their world all the time. For example, while walking home late at night after a party. Would this character make sense in our world? What kind of personality would he have? What would he do? Spontaneous character building. The result was a world full of little stories, making it feel alive and deep. Sometimes they could spend 2 or even 3 years developing the world before finally playing one definitive campaign. Imagine that, working on something for 2 years just to play it once. But when the campaign was ready, they would play for 7 days straight, going home only to sleep. Even then, they kept thinking about the story in their dreams. The next morning, they would scrape together money for cigarettes and coffee, then dive back in. Their game sessions were deeply immersive. At the same time, great isometric RPGs were coming out, and, of course, the group got hooked on them too. They imagined how one day the world of Elysium would be turned into a game or even a movie. But back then, it felt completely unrealistic. If you had told them they would someday make Game of the Year with a massive fan base, they probably wouldn't have believed you. Then, around 2006, tragedy struck. Their friend Martin Luiga's father passed away, leaving him a house and about 65,000 euros. Argo, Robert and Martin moved into that house together and spent 2 years living there, immersed in their world. Thanks to their inheritance, they didn't have to worry about money for a while. In that house, Robert began writing his book Sacred and Terrible Air. Argo recalls walking past Robert's room and seeing him at his computer, working on it. And of course, there were endless discussions, just like before. Talking, debating, sharing ideas. The 3 of them spent countless hours together, every single day. After about 2 years, their little commute fell apart. Around that time, the Cultural Association Zaum was born. Argo stayed involved for a while, but a few years later, he began to drift away. He got married and started taking on different jobs. Argo says he wanted to try becoming a writer, but it seemed impossible. In his words, they were just complete losers in Estonia, without even a finished university education.
Estonia, I don't know, is it true still to this day, but back then it was very hostile to any kind of cultural aspirations from people like us without any formal education or by any definition in the society of Estonia back then. We were complete losers. Like no one had a job. I think like most of my friends, like myself, only have 9 grades of education. Like when you went to the unemployment office and the office lady asked you, so what do you want to become, and you said writer, then you got laughed at, and that's what the situation was.
Argo's life changed dramatically in 2016. At the time he was working at a BMW junkyard. As you can imagine, that was tough work. But in May 2016, Robert officially invited him to join the team as a writer. On one hand, this was a unique chance for Argo to finally do what he loved, writing, and to dive back into the world of Elysium. On the other hand, it was a frightening decision to make. The studio was still looking for investors, so no one knew if the game would even exist. None of them had ever made a video game before. In fact, no one around them had. Estonia didn't really have a game development industry back then, so there was no one to turn to for advice. And remember, Robert's early attempt to publish a novel set in the world of Elysium had been a financial disaster. Nobody wanted the book. What if the same thing happened with the game? Meanwhile, at the junkyard job, Argo was in the middle of getting his Category C driver's license, which would allow him to haul BMWs from the United Kingdom back to Estonia on trailers. It wasn't glamorous, but at least it was a clear path forward. So Argo had to make a choice: stay with something safe and steady, or take a huge risk for the chance to work on his dream project. Not an easy decision. What would you have done?
In an environment like in Estonia, to make that leap, of faith, it was pretty. It was a scary thing. Like I remember, I was still married when I told my wife that I'm quitting my job. I was working at the BMW junkyard at the time. I'm quitting my junkyard job. I'm gonna start making video games. I mean, she was extremely supportive, but I saw she was scared, and I was scared as well.
In the end, that fall, autumn 2016, Argo took the leap. He showed up for his first day as a writer at the studio Zaum. Back then Zaum was tiny, about 10 people. Their office was in the center of Tallinn, inside a half-ruined building that had previously been a squat. And when Argo joined, they were still sharing the space with 3 or 4 hippies, wonderful people as Argo remembers them. There was an improvised gym in one corner, leaking ceilings that sometimes dripped straight into the server room, and electricity that went out all the time. But still, there were desks, there were computers, and there were people making a game.
It gave us this us against the world vibe, and everyone was so motivated and in such good spirits, especially in the beginning. And I don't know, it was magical. I guess it had this. The innocence of making your first video game, but you don't know how hard it's actually gonna be. You don't have that foresight. If you did, you'd probably quit.
Argo's official title was writer, but since no one at Zaum had ever developed a game before, nobody knew what the standard roles were supposed to be. Everyone just did whatever they could. Each writer was responsible for certain characters. Argo's main creations included Kuno, Everclear, the Hardy Boys, and others. During development, the workload was heavy, and the last 9 months were pure crunch. Argo says there were many weeks when he pulled several sleepless nights. He took modafinil just to keep going. but when the game finally launched, they had a 3 to 4 months handover before slowly getting back to work on the final cut. And as you know from the first part of this story, things eventually took a darker turn. Argo himself described what happened afterward as absolutely horrible. But his story with the studio doesn't end there. Here is where another important person enters our story, Dora Klinjic. In February 2022, she joined Zaum as a writer. From that point on, she and Argo would go through this journey side by side. At first, of course, she had no idea what was really happening inside the company. From the outside, it looked like Zaum had just released a groundbreaking game and was thriving. Dora already had experience making games, and she was eager to work on a sequel to Disco Elysium. She was so committed that she quit her PhD in physics to take this job. In the first month, they started working on that sequel, under the codename Y12. Those were good times. The future felt bright. Argo remembers that for him, work back then felt like a form of escape. Everything outside of it was difficult. Falling out with his old friends, having no real life in a new country. Like some other employees, Argo had moved to the UK when Zaum relocated its main office there. But with the constant crunch, there was never enough time to build a normal life or social connections. Work was his escape, the only place he could pour all his energy into something he loved. But soon it became clear that without Robert and Alexander, creating such an ambitious sequel would be almost impossible. The project leads and part of management secretly flew to New York for a week or two. During that trip, they came up with a completely different project, one that would replace the sequel. When they came back, they held a big all-hands meeting, and there they dropped the news. The sequel was cancelled. Instead, the studio would now be working on a new game, under the codename C4. For most of the team, this came as a complete shock. Many of the new hires, like Dora, had joined specifically because they wanted to keep building the world of Elysium. Even the older members had dreamed of continuing the story. And as Argo later said, what management presented as a new direction was so underwhelming that for the first 2 weeks he couldn't even believe it was real. Still, management was so confident in C4 that they encouraged everyone to leave comments and feedback. According to Argo and Dora, the problem was if your comments were negative, you would soon find yourself in an unpleasant one-on-one meeting where you would be told not to undermine your bosses and asked to delete what you wrote. Sounds like a strange way to deal with criticism, right? Let me pause here for a quick note. What Argo and Dora describe about management, their practices, their attitude toward employees, the general atmosphere inside the studio, it all sounds pretty horrible. I'm not going to dive into all these messy details here. If you are curious, the podcast Human Can Opener features 2 long interviews with Argo and Dora, together about 16 hours in total. They go deep into the internals of the studio. I highly recommend it. But in this episode, I'll have to leave most of that aside. Back to our story. Discontent started to grow. And since the official feedback channels clearly were not working, other employees from different departments began approaching Argo and Dora privately. They were more experienced members of the team, so people trusted them. And what they kept hearing was the same thing: concerns about the new project and the direction of the studio. So Argo and Dora decided to take responsibility. They went to management and said, essentially, "Look, a lot of people are worried about C4. Let's all sit down together and figure out how to improve it. Before real production begins, before too much time and money are spent." Now, how do you think management responded? Did they thank them for being honest and promise to take everyone's concerns seriously? The duo says that instead, management decided that Argo and Dora were a huge source of negativity. And rather than dealing with the project's real problems, they focused on dealing with them. It's always easier to blame someone, right? And as history shows, that approach never ends well. So what's the atmosphere like at the studio during this time? Dora later described it this way.
Isolation, individualization, and not allowing people to discuss problems as a team, that has been a signature of the time at Zaum. Like, it already happened then, and it happened every time after that. Problems can never be discussed in a group, because then problems will spread like a contagion. You have to isolate people who have issues or critiques, and you need to take them out without anyone else knowing what their concerns were.
And here is how Argo remembered it.
You very much feel that people are afraid to speak their mind, and no one is saying the things that is on everybody's mind.
About 3 weeks after the announcement, the studio held its first creative meeting for C4 in New York, gathering all the writers. Argo and Dora were invited as well. They were worried, but they also hoped that meeting face-to-face outside of Slack and Zoom might clear the air and resolve some of the tension. When they arrived in New York, they first met informally with the elite in a park. He told them that their behavior had been frustrating and had really upset management. Argo and Dora tried to explain their perspective to show that their criticism had been constructive. That conversation lasted several hours. By the end, it even seemed like they had reached some kind of understanding. They agreed to try again, to do their best to make this new project work.
No one was shouting. It wasn't angry, but it got really emotional. Like, I was crying. I don't remember what Dora, but you were crying. Like, it doesn't matter who was crying. But in the end, once we went through this intense valley, we got to the point where we all agreed that, okay, we have 2 weeks in New York, like 2 weeks of this focused creative work. Like, let's give it our all and not make harsh decisions right now.
But the very next morning, at 6 a.m., they received a cold, formal message from their elite. Meet at specific cafe at specific time, as if the long talk the day before had never happened. Their first thought, we are getting fired. When they showed up, the elite told them they were being removed from the project. Their return tickets had already been booked. They had to leave before the rest of the writing team arrived. And once they got back, they would have a personal meeting with management. They were cut out of all chats, with no explanation given to the rest of the staff. To their colleagues, it was as if they had simply disappeared. And for a whole month, they waited for that dreaded meeting with management, with no idea what would happen. Finally, after that month, they were told they were not being fired, just reassigned. To what? To a money-making type of project. They didn't reveal the details, but imagine this. You join Zaum because you want to work on a sequel to Disco Elysium, and instead you are handed some empty, soulless project. Not exactly inspiring. Naturally, Argo and Dora tried to push back. They argued that their skills could be better used on something meaningful. Why not a smaller project set in the world of Disco Elysium, if not a full sequel? And here, luck was finally on their side. Management gave them 1 week to pitch a new idea. Just 7 days. But in that time, they managed to come up with a strong concept, one that company actually liked. And suddenly, there was hope again. A chance to work on something worthwhile. That project had a codename X7, and they were given 1 year to develop it. Work on the new project began right away. Argo and Dora started writing, trying to pull a team together. And then came a turning point. Martin Luigo published his post on Medium, the one we talked about at the start of the last episode. The post that announced the dissolution of the Cultural Association Zaum, and revealed to the public that Robert, Alexander and Helen had been pushed out of the studio. Honestly, it was surprising they managed to keep it secret for so long. What followed was a very difficult period. The studio and its remaining employees faced a storm of criticism. People were even afraid to write on social media that they worked at Zaum. Morale inside the team hit rock bottom. It was difficult to bear.
Like I said, it was a long period, and during this period, I see every day Dora is crying multiple times a day, and like Dora said, people were afraid to even say that they work in the company. You see life draining out of the faces of your colleagues, and some are more resilient than others. But like even the stoic people, you see that there's this kind of hope is fading.
On the other hand, management was suddenly consumed by legal battles and didn't have much time to interfere with day-to-day development. And so, for a short while, Argo and Dora found themselves in a rare moment of freedom. No one was looking over their shoulders. They could work the way they wanted to, and they did. By December 2022, during the company Christmas party, Argo and Dora presented X7, their new project, to the whole studio for the very first time. The reception was overwhelmingly positive. Many colleagues came up to congratulate them. That wave of support inspired the team and gave them real confidence. For a moment things felt good, really good. But then management found the time to get back to micromanaging. They began reshuffling the structure of the team. Up to that point, Argo and Dora were effectively acting as directors, doing the planning, guiding the vision, shaping the direction of the project. But officially, of course, they weren't directors. They didn't have the title, and their salaries were 3 times lower. That is when management introduced a new creative director for their project. It seemed like after the strong presentation of X7 in December, management started to fear another Robert situation. So they decided to strip Argo and Dora of any real influence. At the same time, they tried to limit their contact with other departments, like the art team. Instead of working directly, everything now had to go through a middleman. It slowed things down and made collaboration much harder. The official explanation? Since Argo and Dora had occasionally asked for more writers to help finish the project on time, management said they were being freed from managerial duties. A new person would handle project management, giving them more time to write. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread. It said People Make Games were preparing a documentary about Disco Elysium and talking to studio employees. We talked about that documentary in the last episode. When Argo learned that CEO would be given an interview, he realized there needed to be at least one voice from inside the studio. Someone who could show that opinions were complicated, that there were employees who respected Robert and Alexander, who felt mistreated by management, but who also just wanted to work, to show that behind the company's corporate face were real people. So he made the decision to go to People Make Games himself and give an interview. The interview was recorded. Management wanted it done either in the office or with an HR rep present, but Argo managed to do it from home, without oversight. Still, a few days later, he had to hand over the recording to management. After they watched it, there was of course a follow-up call. Argo had made some sharp comments about a poorly received DLC called Collage Mod. He had even called it absolute garbage and shameless fan service. Management forced him to apologize for those words. And from that moment, things grew harsher. That interview became the breaking point in his relationship with management. For Argo and Dora, life in the studio grew even heavier. They often became the target of criticism. It looks like that management began turning the rest of the company against them.
I remember crying the whole afternoon afterwards because why is it okay? Like, we are these pieces of shit in the studio who are obviously troublemakers and evil, and you can take out all your frustration on us, no matter who you are, no matter which position you work in. It was extremely upsetting and very unfair because they were angry that people from their projects wanted to work on our projects, or sometimes that management had moved them, but they made us the bad guys, like absolutely just like unloaded on us.
And yet there were bright spots too. The project was growing step by step. In May 2023, the company held a large gathering in Porto, bringing together nearly the entire studio. Teams presented their projects, including Argo and Dora's X7.
And yeah, it was really one of the proudest moments of these last few years. You can't fake this kind of wow moment that went through there. Like, people were genuinely very, very excited about this.
And here is how Argo remembers what he felt in that moment, in the middle of what he calls a cold war with management.
You know what? It is such a weird thing because even there, okay, after already being in this cold war for a while, seeing this presentation on the screen, it still felt that you cannot debate quality, that there is enough of us on X7 who believe into it so strong, you can't take every one of us out. And if we're together, if we keep pushing like this, like it felt like we have a chance to turn the tide, turn things around.
Around this time, one of the studio's biggest projects, a sci-fi game known as P1, was cancelled. Many of the people from that team were reassigned to Argo and Dora's Project X7. Suddenly, Argo and Dora were not just writing and building their game anymore. They also had to train and onboard a wave of new people. And then came the big question: who would lead this newly combined team? Management, of course, wanted the leads from the cancelled P1 project to take over, not Argo and Dora. Let's pause for a second. You have two projects. One that is being cancelled, and another that has been presented to the whole company with a huge success. Who would you pick to lead? Seems obvious, right? Well, apparently not. Management began holding closed-door meetings with Argo and Dora. It seems that the goal of these meetings was to convince the duo that they were not fit to lead. But the process dragged on for 12 weeks. 12 weeks of being told not to discuss it with anyone else. In those meetings, they were often criticized, humiliated, and provoked. Dora, in particular, took the brunt of it.
We are enduring these sessions where we're sitting in these calls and we're being humiliated. I was the youngest woman in that room. I was the only woman in the room, but I was also the youngest person there. Everyone there has an established, high-ranking role in this company. They're all men who are, 10 years or more older than me, I think, everyone. And none of them would say anything. They'll be muted in the whole call. No one would speak up when it would go on these rants of just cutting into me, questioning me, trying to really provoke me, trying to upset me. Like when people were just, undermining my experience, no one would fucking say anything. It was so hard. And the fact that we couldn't talk to our friends on the project, you couldn't go and say, man, these people are really, they're really treating us poorly. Not being able to say that for weeks, it was absolutely devastating for the mental health. It was horrible.
Worn out, Argo and Dora finally decided to take a short vacation just to clear their heads. And, of course, management used that moment. While they were away, new roles were put in place. The discussion wasn't finished, nothing had been agreed, but their responsibilities were stripped away and given to others. That August they spent their vacation in Estonia, and with each day away from work, they started to recover. They remembered what life could feel like, how their minds could work when not under constant pressure. But eventually, the time came to return to London, back to an unresolved conflict and a mountain of stress. In Estonia, Argo came up with one last plan to try and fix things. He knew it was risky. If it didn't work, he would probably be fired anyway. So he sent a message to management asking for a meeting on Monday morning. When they sat down, Argo began by explaining. When X7 was a small team, development moved quickly, but as more people joined, it slowed down, becoming bloated and inefficient. His proposal was bold: shrink the team back to just 9 people, and most importantly, bring back Robert and Alexander as special consultants. It would be a chance for the studio to reconcile with them. Within 6 months, the small team could finish writing the script for the entire game. Then, once the script was ready, the rest of the studio could work freely without waiting on the writers. I suppose management was stunned. Imagine how outrageous this was for them. Who did Argo think he was? How dare he suggest working with Robert and Alexander after everything that had happened? Still, they said they would take a week to think it over. During that week, a writing workshop was scheduled in London. Argo remembers it as one of the best sessions they'd ever had. They planned the whole story, ran several workshops, and achieved 3 times more than expected. During the day, the work felt productive and inspiring. But every evening, back at his hotel, Argo couldn't stop worrying. How would management react to his proposal?
During this one week, like at least my mentality was that they are gonna punish me for this insolence of proposing to take over, and kind of I thought, like, at least I want this work that we do to speak for itself. I want you to later look at it and think, man, that's kind of a shame that no one is doing this stuff anymore.
And as it turned out, his fears were not misplaced. Soon he received a long, menacing email. The message was clear that his response would determine not just his future at Zaum, but in the entire industry. It was crushing. His mood collapsed. Up until then, maybe he still believed things could change. But this letter showed him the reality. He spent 24 hours writing his reply, 11 pages in total. At that point, Argo and Dora decided they would at least give their all to the project. Management expected a playable build by December, just 3 months away. If they were going to be fired after that, at least the game would be left in good shape, something their colleagues could be proud of. At the same time, they reached out to a union. They shared the long email, explained what was happening inside the company, and met with a union lawyer. The lawyer offered to help prepare documents that could protect them in case of firing or other illegal actions. But Argo and Dora made a choice: focus first on finishing the game, then deal with paperwork afterward. Later, they would deeply regret that decision. And so, the big crunch began. The pace suddenly exploded. This was real crunch. 15-hour workdays non-stop. People crying in meetings. unrealistic deadlines demanding an impossible amount of work in an impossible short time. And on top of it, an anti-crunch policy. If anyone was caught working overtime, they could be fired. So here is the paradox. Deadlines that were impossible without crunch, but rules that officially banned it. The result? People kept crunching anyway, but in secret, and no one complained anymore. For Argo and Dora, the only thing that made this survivable was the fact that they had no other life in the UK outside of work. They hadn't been there long enough to build one. No hobbies, no friends, nothing. Otherwise they wouldn't have had the time or energy to keep going. Also, it often felt like they were making the game not with the studio support, but against the studio, resisting and fighting the management at every step. Of course, they don't mean their teammates. The team itself was incredibly supportive. They mean management. And of course, they had each other's support too. That helped them keep going.
But I used to think about this every fucking day, that how lucky we are that we have each other, because when Roberts and Rostov's departure happened, I was so fucking broken that if I had never met Dora, I would have been swollen up in this. Like, I would have never on my own found this light or like this dignity, self-respect to stand up to this.
1 month remained before the milestone deadline. Dora planned to file a formal complaint about management's behavior. She even told HR, but she added that she would do it only after the milestone was delivered.
And I said, yes, I do want to make a complaint. And then she was like, okay, when? And I said, well, I want to complete this milestone. I want to do the work. I don't want to leave my team hanging. I don't want to focus on that. I'm going to first do my work responsibly so that I can, not interrupt this. I'm going to do this. You can expect my complaint around the 1st of December. So kids, never do this. Don't ever tell the company, I'm going to file a complaint against you on the 1st of December, because like around 2 days prior, when we were still in the thick of it, still working overtime, a complaint arrived against me and Argo where they had got to file a grievance that Argo and I's toxic behavior have caused him unable to return to work.
Just days before Dora's planned complaint, management struck first. Argo and Dora were accused of toxic behavior. A disciplinary investigation was opened against them. Sound familiar? The same tactic had been used earlier against Robert and Alexander. And once again, they were told they couldn't talk to anyone else about the investigation. Isolation, that is one of the management's main weapons. When you are cut off, unable to speak to colleagues, it's a terrible feeling. No one can help you. They reached out to their union, but they regretted not preparing earlier, not having their documents ready, not moving sooner. By warning the company of their intent, they gave management time to hit back first. That is when the real war with management began. The one advantage Argo and Dora had was that they had already started recording meetings and interactions with management. They were keeping track of everything. Dora assembled her case. She put together an 80-page grievance document, detailing every instance of bullying, harassment and discrimination. And she had proof, calendar entries, chat logs, emails. At the same time, the demo, the one the team had crunched 3 brutal months to finish, was finally ready. Inside the studio, the reception was extremely positive. People loved it. But by then, it didn't seem to matter. By February 2024, Argo and Dora received an email. Project X7 was cancelled. A redundancy process had begun. HR rolled out scoring tables to rank employees, but it was obvious who would stay and who would go. In the end, Argo and Dora chose to resign. Staying in that company any longer was impossible. And just like that, the last original writer of Disco Elysium was gone from Zaum. As I mentioned in the last episode, several new studios announced in 2024 that they were working on spiritual successors to Disco Elysium. At first, Argo and Dora tried working with some of them as consultants, but those collaborations went nowhere. So they had another idea. What if they built their own small studio? But this time everything would be set up in a way that prevented what happened at Zaum. No investor could ever buy out the others and take over. Ownership would be distributed carefully between creators, workers, investors, and even players. That is how Summer Eternal was born. They don't call themselves just a game studio, but an art collective. On October 11th, 2024, they released their manifesto. Our mission is to unite world-class artists and creatives in a truly independent game studio which will always prioritize artistic integrity over personal comfort, profit margin, short-term interests, and big tech profit bubbles. That is how the manifesto reads. But shortly after announcing the studio, lawsuits began to arrive. One of them accused Argo of breaking his non-compete agreement. The court sided with the claim, forbidding him from working for 6 months. And so, spending their last savings on lawyers, Argo and Dora left the UK with their 3 cats. One night, somewhere on a French highway, their van broke down and died. That was when Argo launched a GoFundMe campaign asking for help to survive the winter. The fundraiser ended in just 2 months, faster than expected. And here is what Argo wrote in response. 2 months ago, I stood by a dead van in the middle of the night on a windy French highway, after leaving behind the life I had lived in the United Kingdom for the past 6 years. Freezing, sleep-deprived, and dead broke. A terrifying realization dawned on me as I looked at my partner and our 3 cats waiting in the van. I had put us all in this horrible situation, and I really didn't know what to do next. Fiasco after fiasco that led to this moment crossed my mind and filled me with a kind of cold fear I thought only children could feel. The fear of being helpless and small. This was the absolute low point of my life since I can remember. I came very close to regretting standing up to the mighty and the corrupt, since it was now my most beloved who were paying the price. I will never forget that moment, cause without it, I would have never experienced the love and the support you wonderful people have shown me. We don't ask for help in the wild north. It's easier to just curl up and die than to admit that I am not enough. It's not strength, it's a fear that isolates us from love. This morning I woke up to a notification that the fundraiser had reached its goal. It feels surreal, unbelievable. In less than 2 months? Get out of here, it can't be.
I have been completely overwhelmed by the amount of support people have shown me. Already, generally from the words of support, I was stunned. But how much people have financially helped us in this situation, literally brought us back from the brink of destruction, and actually gave us means to fight. I don't know the words to express the extent of my gratitude in this.
In April 2025, the court injunction finally ended, and Argo and Dora could return to work. On their social media, they posted a simple but hopeful message: "We are back." They haven't shared concrete details yet, but in recent interviews they've expressed real optimism about their future project. So now all we can do is wait and see what Argo Tulik, Doro Klinjic and Summer Eternal will create. This has been the Released Podcast. Thank you for joining me through this season on video games. The podcast is now going on a short break, but as you hear this, I'm already working on the next season. It won't be about video games, but it will absolutely be about technologies that have changed our lives and the people who created them. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next season.